And so what I'm saying to people is, rather than constantly throwing your responsibility to anyone, whether it's a doctor or Jesus Christ, actually taking responsibility and working with. So I pray all the time. I do my meditations. I connect to Christ Jesus daily, but not for the reason for that being to take and do everything that I need to do in this life, but to support me, to guide me, to inspire me. And that is what, people need to do, but you still need to do your own work. It's not to go, okay, I'm going to have somebody, a spiritual being, take over, because what would be the point of you?
Welcome to Give a Heck. I am your host, Dwight Heck, and for much of my life, lived my life in quiet desperation, wondering how I was going to pay the bills, take vacations, save for retirement, and one day wondering if I would get off the hamster wheel of life and have purpose. A life that most of society lives, which takes us to work, then home, then repeat, and pays us hopefully enough just to survive. The harsh truth that most live with more month than money and have no idea how to live life on purpose, not by accident. This ensures the mass majority are living not just financially broke, however emotionally and mentally as well due to financial pressures. In each episode, I will introduce you to thoughts, ideas, and guests that can help you to learn how you too can live life on purpose, not by accident. Good day, and welcome back to the Give a Heck podcast. I'm your host, Dwight Heck. What if your body wasn't just a vessel, but a messenger? What if every ache, every illness, every emotional spiral was your body trying to speak a truth you've been too busy, too afraid, or too disconnected to hear? Today on Give a Heck podcast, we're diving into the extraordinary with Inna Segal, a woman whose journey from chronic pain and emotional collapse to spontaneous healing and global impact will challenge everything you think you know about health. Inna just didn't study healing. She lived it, from childhood trauma and cultural isolation to the devastating stillbirth of her child. Her body became a battlefield, but instead of surrendering, she listened. She placed her hands on her pain, asked for help, and witnessed something miraculous: a golden light, a vision of her spine, and a flood of insight that changed her life forever. Now she teaches others to do the same. Her best-selling book, The Secret Language of Your Body, has helped millions decode the emotional and energetic roots of illness. Her work reveals that healing isn't linear, it's layered, ancestral, intuitive, and deeply personal. This episode isn't just about wellness. It's about waking up. It's about reclaiming the wisdom your body holds, holding the timing of your soul, and learning to heal from the inside out. If you've ever felt stuck, sick, or spiritually disconnected, this conversation is your invitation to begin again. I'd like to welcome you to the show, Inna. Thanks so much for agreeing to come on and share with us some of your life journey.
Thank you so much. So great to be here with you.
Thank you for coming on. Just for the listeners or viewers of the show, we have a huge time difference. Enya's in Australia. I'm in Canada, two different time zones. She's early morning. I'm late afternoon. So we're going to enjoy this conversation. But thank you so much for getting up so early so that you could be on the Give a Heck podcast and share your knowledge.
It's all good. Just learning to connect to all different time zones.
Yeah, makes sense. So one of the things I mentioned to you before we started the show was that I really like to know about a person's origin story, not just the fluff surrounding their life. Oh, I finished school, I went to college, university, I went to do whatever, and this is who I am now. I find that people connect the most once we know and are able to connect with commonalities, similarities, challenges that we've gone through from our earliest recollections to where we are today. So if you could do me a favor and please share your earliest recollections to where you are today?
So, I think my story kind of connects to, you mentioned ancestry. So I started having digestive issues when I was a really young child, but I didn't know why I was struggling with that until later when I started putting all the pieces together. And I really believe that when we have issues early on in life, it is often connected to what went on with the family, or depending on the part of the body, which is what I wrote about. And so for me, nobody could figure out why I was having this much pain, or sometimes I would even end up in the hospital, and the doctors would go, "We don't know what to do with her." And in my tracing this back, I really connected to my grandmother in particular. So I was born in Eastern Europe, I was born in Belarus. And my grandmother had gone through the war and lost seven of her brothers and sisters. So she was one of eight. And her mother was actually extremely clairvoyant, to a point where people in the village would come, and that my grandmother lived in, would come and bring food all the time to get a reading from my great grandmother. And my great grandmother said to my grandmother when she was 12, the war is coming and you and your father will survive, but everybody else will die, including, she was pregnant with a baby at the time. And so my grandmother literally survived because of her mother, and also her mother was shot to allow my grandmother to run and save her life. So this was all not talked about for about 50 years in terms of both of my grandparents. My grandfather ended up in Siberia for 10 years in a like gulag, in a camp, for something he didn't do. So both of them had gone through this massive trauma, didn't talk about it, because apparently if you spoke about it at that time in Belarus, you could go back to jail, or, wherever. And so I grew up not knowing anything, but having these digestive issues where my body would just blow up if I ate the wrong thing, or I just feel sick. And so when we left Eastern Europe when I was 9, and we lived in Italy for about 9 months, which I loved. That's probably where I felt the best. We were about half an hour from Rome, and I thrived. And then in my mind, I thought Australia was going to be like Italy, but better. And so when we came to Australia, that wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be, to Melbourne originally. And I started, whilst I was in Italy, I found it very easy to learn Italian, even though I didn't know the words, and I felt really supported. But when I came to Australia, I didn't know one word of English, and I felt like I was being bullied for that in school, and I was being attacked. And so, in my family, there is a skin issue called psoriasis that a lot of people have. And this psoriasis started appearing on my elbows and my arms and my knees. And it was very uncomfortable. So I was about 10 to 11 when that happened. And then after a few years, I ended up going to this high school. And in this high school, it was very interesting because my parents wanted me to have this amazing education. So they were like, we're willing to pay for it. We're willing to invest into a private school. What they weren't aware of was that this private school had a few spots for people from Eastern Europe, where they gave a discount, but most people that came to that school were from super rich families, whereas I came from, when I was in Belarus, like we didn't have a toilet in the house, we didn't have water, like we didn't have anything. Whereas these children, teenagers, grew up in like what looked to me like palaces. And so they didn't actually like the idea of people who were not as wealthy as them coming to this school. And so the bullying became very, very different. It was an attack on, the fact that you are lower than us, you'll never be like us, and why are you kind of coming into this school? You don't belong with us. And this is something that I felt, and all my friends who are also Eastern European felt, because you could only be friends with those that connected with you. So my back started deteriorating around that, high school time. And so my mum started taking me. She only believed in medicine, but that's all she knew. So she started taking me from one doctor to another to physiotherapists, and things just were not really improving. And then when I was about 18, it was getting pretty bad. I couldn't sit properly. I was always moving around. My back was getting worse and worse. And then I met at the time a partner that I had, and he was very open to alternative healing. So he started encouraging me to go to as many alternative practitioners as I could. But I was really going there with this attitude that I know nothing about my body. I'm the victim of what's happening to me. I'm not friends with my body. And you know everything, and you're going to fix it for me, which wasn't working for me after several years. Sometimes I was going to see somebody 5 days a week. So it became almost like a full-time job trying to fix myself, which I thought was fixing. And the point of transformation came when, well, sorry, just before that, as you mentioned, I got pregnant when I was 18, which I thought to myself like was the worst thing that could happen to me at the time, because I was, kind of voted the least likely to have children young. I was not really, I wasn't excited about that. And so it took a lot for me to go, you know what, I will, I will go through with this. So I adjusted I felt like I adjusted everything inside myself. And then when I was about 8 and a bit months pregnant, maybe 8.5 months, I went to see this nurse, and I just, again, I wasn't very intuitive in terms of awareness at that time. I just kept saying to her, I just feel like something's off. Something doesn't feel right. And she was like, no, you're wrong. Everything's fine. It's like, everything's going the way it's meant to be. Don't worry about it. And a week later, I ended up giving birth to this child who died. And to me, that was so shocking, because I had just not considered that it was even a possibility for somebody in Australia that was that young for that to happen. And so I really, really felt like the victim, and I wanted to die. I was depressed. I was anxious. And I was seeing this chiropractor because I was in agony most of the time. And the whole pregnancy just made it so much worse, where I could hardly walk. I was scared that I was going to end up in a wheelchair. And so when I ended up, I'd been seeing this particular chiropractor for over a year by the time so I was about just over 20 and a bit. I wake up one day and I was like, I am in agony and I cannot go through another day like this. And so I went to see this chiropractor. I was literally out of my body when I got to his office. I was in that much pain. And he came out and I was seeing him 3 times a week at that stage. He came out and of his office because I called, he'd heard. And he just looked at me and he said, your body is really stuck. And I said to him, yeah, I know that part. What are you going to do about it? But I didn't really know that part. And he just looked at me and he said, well, nothing. There's nothing I can do because you want to be stuck. Go home. And that was my wake-up call, because on the way home, I was so angry. I wasn't depressed at that point. I was so, so angry about what he'd said. But I started thinking that I was actually stuck, and that was the language that my body was speaking. I was holding on to everything that happened to me from childhood, from my grandparents. Well, later on, I found out just everything, all this trauma from this loss of the child. And so when I did go home, as you were sharing, the first thing that I did, I made a decision that I was going to heal. I had no idea how to do that. So I went, I'm just going to start by placing my hands on my back. And I realized as I did that, that I wasn't breathing. Like I was just holding my breath. That's what had been doing for years because I didn't want to feel pain. And so I started breathing deeply with the pain. And then my mind started being super negative and saying, what are you doing? And so I started essentially counting backwards from 30 just to stop my mind from being negative. And this is when I had this moment and I thought to myself, you know what? I am so confused. I don't fully know if there's something truly divine out there. I think there is, but I don't know. But I'm going to ask for help because I just don't know if I'm actually going to be able to do anything. And so I asked and I said, if there is something divine out there, help me now. And that's when this warmth started flooding my body. And I had this golden light in front of me. And I thought, okay, something's happening, but am I making it up? And so then this thought came into my mind. I wonder what my back would look like if I could see it from just nowhere. I'd never had this thought in my life. And then I literally had, it was like this light switch went on and I could see my back, like X-ray. And I got scared at first because I got a shock, right? And then I started asking questions like, show me why. Why do I have this? And everything that I'm just shared with you showed up as these memories, but very visual images of me. It started with me coming to Australia and how I was bullied and how I pushed it all back and also into my skin. And then I allowed myself to feel and to cry. And then it was all about the school and my parents and them not understanding what went on and kind of their conflicts and how I just didn't feel safe. I couldn't share with them what happened at school. I couldn't, we weren't understanding each other. And so I was really struggling during that time of my life. And then my grandparents and everything they went through, and how my grandmother's loss was kind of connected to my own loss of family and of my child. And then I just had this awareness that I was this sponge and I was always taking people's energy and pain into my body. And then I fell asleep and had a great sleep. And I could feel my whole body start to unwind. There was definitely this unwinding of years and years of tension. And so when I woke up the next day, it felt like 70% of the pain was better. My back didn't feel twisted. I could move. I still felt very fragile. And so I thought, okay, for the next however long it's going to take, I'm going to keep connecting to my body and exploring and asking questions because I felt like I'd opened this door. And so I kept doing it. And by maybe, 3 weeks, all the psoriasis disappeared. My back just felt so much better, so much stronger. Um, I could eat more food. The digestive issues took way, way longer because I felt like it was very ancestral and loss related. And and my anxiety went right down. And I just thought to myself, something has happened, something, amazing has happened. And then I had a few experiences that showed me that I was able to connect and see things in other people. And so that kind of opened the door to what I do now.
That's awesome. I absolutely love your story. Um, you're an incredible storyteller. Obviously, all the communication and stuff you've done over the years is certainly helped you, but I could feel everything that you were talking about, like the emotional state from you going from your home country to going to Italy to going to Australia. You went through a lot. You had a lot of challenges, but you mentioned that I brought up ancestry, and really when you think about it, our learned behaviors are so powerful. I know myself, it wasn't until let's say 7 6 7 years ago that I realized that I was an empath. Simply the reason I bring that up is you talk about accepting other people's pains, anguishes, and I was a bully kid myself. I was sickly. I knew but all that stuff, all that negative energy already at that young age, I was accepting it, and my body was speaking out against it. And if you think about it, when I was a child, they didn't know what was going on. They didn't know what to do. And like you said, you have health issues, you go to different modalities and they help you out. And for you, it was a chiro. I had similar circumstances where it was literally 16 years of going because I have a degenerative spine disease, getting treated 2 to 3 times a week and not necessarily getting a solution or a resolution. It was just like I was a giant ATM for them, bank machine. Here's more money, come back, right?
Yeah.
Nobody
Yeah.
really saying, hey, maybe it's between your 6 inches between your ears. Maybe it's a mental issue. Maybe it's a learned behavior. Maybe it's something that happened in your childhood. You're in your 50s and you're still having the same issues and we can't fix it. But so many people in society, they're on a hamster wheel. They force us one on their own hamster wheel, and it's just about generating and clients coming in, making some money. So your chiro telling you that you're stuck, that is an amazing thing to hear. I had a family doctor retire last year, and I had another doctor that I got introduced to. There's a long waiting list for medical professionals in Canada. I don't know about Australia, but it took me a few months. I got a new doctor. The old doctor was 37 years. He was always the same old, same old. He was caring, but the pattern was stuck. We were on a whole pattern on how he was helping me, whether or not he was even listening to what I was saying, where changes or, not necessarily trained for mental health. Went to the new doctor and he started challenging me about everything. You've been going to what modality for how many years and you're still there? This was the first meeting this doctor. He was interviewing me. He hadn't even decided he wanted to take me on. And it was just shocking. And that was a little over a year ago that I first was sitting waiting, and it hasn't even been a year that I've been dealing with his doctor. My health in the last 8 9 months dealing with somebody that told me that it's up here more than, and even as a lifestyle coach, I coach people and all this stuff, but I wasn't coaching myself. I couldn't see my own forest for the trees, if that makes sense.
Mm.
Right. So a proper medical professional started me on a path of where my health's been the best it's been, and my mental, physical, and emotional health, though I thought was all good. Really, we fool ourselves too, right? Oh, I'm going to be suffering with this health issue the rest of my life because I was told so. I was told by a professional. Those listening and watching, the only reason I bring this up is we both have discussed the fact that we can get, poor advice or continue on the path of popping pills or whatever the doctors are giving you. I'm not against the medical professional. I'm against the fact that they don't educate on a high enough level that our body is tied directly to our emotional and mental state of mind, which you conferred, right? Which is, I really appreciate you sharing that. Um, you know, and I like the fact you said, you were accepting other people's pain and it just your body got worse and worse. It was generational. But then you connected with yourself and you started asking yourself good questions. I love that. People, do you realize that just because you have a question doesn't mean it's a good one? Think about how even if you're going to say that question to somebody else or yourself, start to become a person that follows human nature or personal, how the body gives out energy. Visualize and watch people. Be a people watcher. I do that. And see if you can see what's going on with them just because of how you're not audibly hearing them, but you're visually watching them. and start picking up on cues within conversations, then along with those visual cues, you will start to understand more about yourself, but you'll also learn how to deal and be empathetic, right? Compassionate toward others and through their own journeys. And then you'll do like um, you've just done for us. You know, it basically has made it so that we understand, we can relate, and we can connect because the challenges we all go through from learned behavior is prevalent in the world, not just Australia, North America, Europe. People just don't understand how to analyze themselves, feel their body language, see somebody else's body language, know when to talk, know when to listen, know when to walk away, right? Anyway,
Yeah.
I'll get off my soapbox. I just love your story, though. It was it was great, right? The best part, though, Caro said you were stuck. A professional that said, "Hey, I'm not taking your money. You're stuck." And then you
Yeah.
having that epiphany and that best night's sleep, like it's just awesome. I loved it. Thank you so much for sharing. Um, you know, you talked about that night where you placed your hands on your back and you saw that golden light. I thought that was so profound. What else did that moment teach you about your body's capacity to heal? Like you talked about it and things got better and better. But what was that moment for you? Do you constantly revert back to that moment as a guiding light that you've changed and are continuing to change? What can you share more about that experience?
And I think it's so connected to what you just said, which is how I asked the questions. So firstly, up until that moment, I was always communicating or asking things from a place of the victim, and that I didn't have anything to do with my body. My body and my mind and my emotions and my life experiences were completely separate. So I had no connection or understanding. And at that moment, it became I started asking from a place of, in one way, being very curious, in another way, being quite empowered. So I started asking empowering questions, not questions that were like, why do I have this? Because that's what I kept saying before that. I'm so young. What have I done? How, what did I do to deserve this? This is how most of us say it. And I'm so unlucky. I'm struggling. Look at my friends. They don't have those issues. Whereas at this moment, which changed everything, and it's such a beautiful question that you've asked, I went, hold on a sec. If I understand and I'm curious, then I actually can do something about this. I can't do anything if I don't understand, if I am a constant victim. And so from that moment, I started asking completely different questions, and I started to connect to my body differently. So I started to befriend it. Because I literally felt like he was my enemy. He was working against me. He wanted to hurt me. And I hear this from so many people, right? And I think you were sharing that your own story is a little bit like that. Like, what can I do? And who can, and who else can I go and see? And why can't they fix me? And so on. And so I actually realized that my body was this, I guess, wisdom. I had so much wisdom, but I needed to be open, be asking the right questions, and really connect to the internal wisdom, not just what I wanted to hear. And that's the other thing, is that the reason people often say, well, I'm not, I don't hear anything. My question from the body, my question is like, you don't hear it or you don't want to, because the minute that you do get insights, what I also realize is that we actually have to often make changes, and those changes are on the level of your mind thinking, which then influences your feelings and how you feel about things. But it's also changing your storyline of what you keep telling yourself. And then often you have to physically do something different. You have to physically change something in your, you know, potentially in your experience. And sometimes that physical change could be, how you live in your environment. So you might change things in your environment that were not working for you. Could be that you clean up your mess, right? It could be that you move somewhere. It could be that you start having all sorts of new realizations of what you can and can't do. And so for me, it opened up the door to so many new perceptions, new ideas, new willingness to step out of my comfort zone. Because I was I was somebody who always had courage and I always stood up for the things that I believed in, but I also allowed people to really impact me. And at that moment, it was like, hold on a sec. Whatever people say to me in the future, how about I connect back to myself first and reflect on what they say as well. So if they tell me, your body can't heal or you can't do something, rather than just believing, but about everything, um, what if I start to connect back to myself? Maybe I have this intuitive wisdom and guidance that can move me through life in a completely different way, but I need to be in tune. So intuitive actually to me means to be in tune with your own wisdom and yourself. So yeah, that's all the things that I explored. But nobody's asked that question before, so thank you.
You're welcome. I appreciate your response. If we all could turn on our intuition switch to be intuitive or to be aware, some people might not understand that connection, that word, but awareness is so key. I know myself, when I developed a process years ago to go to bed with gratefulness, right? And being aware of what my day was like. What were my feelings throughout that day? What did I do right? What did I do wrong? Or what did I do that wasn't necessarily wrong, but it could be improved upon? And having those clarity moments with myself, that conversation with myself, not with others, letting my brain think about it, waking up and being grateful I woke up, and then listening to what I'd asked myself, how it came back. For me, I believe, obviously I'm a Christian, I'm a spiritual person that likes to pray. So on top of all that, I look for answers and listen to them. Sometimes I don't. I ask again, I think about it. I have awareness when I go to bed, or I have awareness when I get up. During the day, you can have awareness too when you're feeling off, right? Think to yourself, what caused this? Maybe it was an hour, 2 hours before, and it isn't causing a reaction immediately. Be aware. Talk to yourself. Be a person that is always understanding that we're complicated. We just are, right? We're people that are unique like our fingerprints, and we all evolve and grow at different paces. But just understand that you can change. And again, this isn't a slight on the medical community, but sometimes we go in with I'm a broken attitude, and you bring in drama and you add it even worse. And if a doctor has any form of empathy themselves, they're thinking, geez, I just want to fix this person. They're not necessarily thinking of long term of your mental health or finding out about your origin to the specifics to say, hey, that's a broken issue that's between the 6 inches of your ears, and it's affecting your medical and your physical health. So I understand why doctors push pills. I understand why they do what they do, but at the end of the day, it's all on us. And you sharing how you made it about you, and it has to be. In order for us to be healthy human beings, we have to be selfish about ourselves. And once you became selfish about yourself, and we're going to dive more into that, I'm so excited to learn more. Look what you've accomplished. Those that are new to you don't realize what you've accomplished. I obviously, prepping for the show and all the research I do before I even have somebody on, I've learned a lot about you. So I'm excited to continue on and start talking about writing as a medicine. And why do I say that? People laugh at me. I myself found writing my own book, I've only wrote one, was it was a very cathartic experience. It was very healing. It taught me things about myself that I knew but didn't really ever was aware of, right? It taught me more self-awareness about myself
Mm.
and the ability to share the trials and tribulations from my origin right up to where I am today. My book is basically the way I do my podcast. It really finds out about people. It shares some about personal, business, family, whatever people want to share. But it's great though. I found writing to be very cathartic. What was it like for you to write your books, especially the secret language of your body?
Can I just say something just before we go to the
Sure,
book? Because
sure,
you've mentioned something that I've never had a chance to really discuss before.
sure.
And you've mentioned firstly that we're complicated, and I believe that if we can see ourselves as complex in a beautiful, exciting way, as opposed to like, oh my God, then we're never going to be bored because we're always going to be in that place of discovery. So that's number one that I wanted to just mention. Number two, you mentioned being a Christian person, who prays and who connects to Christ. And again, it's times I find that people will put, especially on social media, they'll connect to a post that I've made and they'll say, Jesus heals me. And I just want to unpack that for a minute
Sure.
because I feel like there's such misunderstanding in that comment, because it's kind of saying, I don't have to take responsibility because I have a belief in Jesus, as opposed to I actually have spent the last 11 years of my life studying a lot about Jesus Christ as a being and everything connected to this, in detail from more of a, let's call it, a mystical perspective of understanding a lot of pieces connected to what happened and even his healing and what he did. And everything that I've understood about this points back to that, and I'm going to call Christ Jesus because I believe Christ and Jesus are not the same being, and that Christ is a godly being that came into the being of a human that was Jesus, and that all his teachings were actually about us developing a sense of I amness and our ability to grow. He didn't say, do nothing and I'll do everything for you, which is what a lot of people misunderstand. And so they go, I don't need to become a better person. I don't need to actually work on myself and understand and recognize what were the qualities that Christ Jesus had, that I can become and evolve in myself. And as opposed to going, well, I don't have to do anything. As long as I do a prayer, I'm going to be healed. That is not what was taught a lot at all. In fact, once you actually look at it from a more mystical understanding, you see that he constantly encouraged us to grow and to take responsibility and to actually, so much about healing work is understanding that maybe somebody hurt me. Like, yeah, maybe somebody abused me or did something, and that's not my fault. It's not about that. But because that happened, I can blame, or I can actually change my perspective and go, how do I grow from this experience? How do I heal from this experience? And I had this when I was 22, I had this incredible experience with my grandparents. So it was their 50th wedding anniversary, and they had this party in this restaurant. And as I was going up the stairs to this party, something shifted in me, and I started seeing people's souls. I literally could not see their body. And when I got into the restaurant, I connected to my grandparents. And up until that moment, I remember thinking for years and years, they were the victims of, of absolute horror. My grandmother losing all her family, and struggling and suffering for so many years. And, it's like even in Belarus after the war, there's always struggle. She never had anything, like she never had much. And my grandfather just going and like being put into Siberia, which is, minus 50 Celsius, was something he didn't do for 10 years. Um, like that's that, and he saw people being killed. He had a gun at his head so many times. Um, I just felt like they were the victims of their life, and what's the point? And in that moment, when I went up the stairs, it was like my whole perception transformed literally 360 degrees. And I actually saw my grandparents as the most courageous souls who came here to show what courage looked like, because they were incredibly courageous. My grandmother survived on her own in the forest in Belarus for 4 years, literally following her intuition and like being shot at different times and running and having people being shot next to her, all sorts of horrific things. And I was like, wow, they're so courageous. They've like I am in this family because I'm here to learn courage. And so it completely changed my whole perspective of this, why bad things happen to us or why traumatic things happen to us and what they are here to teach us. And so what I'm saying to people is, rather than constantly throwing your responsibility to anyone, whether it's a doctor or Jesus Christ, actually taking responsibility and working with. So I pray all the time. I do my meditations. I connect to Christ Jesus daily, but not for the reason for that being to take and do everything that I need to do in this life, but to support me, to guide me, to inspire me. And that is what, people need to do, but you still need to do your own work. It's not to go, okay, I'm going to have somebody, a spiritual being take over, because what would be the point of you? So just, wanted to share that because I've never had an opportunity to do that in a
That's fine. That's
podcast.
good. That's good to share it
Um,
though. But
yeah,
you layered it though. I liked it. So from whether you're talking to a doctor, a religious person, or somebody and you're just doing your prayer, at the end of the day, it still requires action. But we were put onto this planet by a being far greater than us to serve. Everybody always says, well, to serve, you're here to serve others. Well, first and foremost, if you don't serve yourself first and like who you see in the mirror, like what your daily life is, whether it's hills and valleys, trials and tribulations, you're not going to grow. You're always going to be living in the shadow of what society or these professionals tell you. You're not critically thinking, you're not becoming a critical thinker by constantly expecting others to give you the answers. Even my medical professional, I should have questioned it years before, but we get comfortable, right? We get comfortable in what our faith teaches us, our religion, right? Our whether whatever form of Christianity or maybe you're not somebody that is in organized religion. Maybe you are somebody that talks to the universe. At the end of the day, you're still responsible for you. You got to take onus for your actions, where you want to grow. Is it easy? In some ways, it is. In other ways, it can be difficult. But the answer is still the same. You got to start. Take a baby step. Move forward. Start questioning things in a kind way to yourself, If you don't wouldn't talk to other people the way you talk to yourself, stop. Right? That's one of the most simplest
Yeah.
things that people need to grasp. But thank you so much for sharing that. Anything else in regards to that before we move on to the books?
I think that was a good little exploration. But in terms of the books, so I've almost completed, well, I'll say my fourth book, but I had written others that maybe I self-published or, didn't get published because it wasn't the right time, it wasn't the right information. So we don't always write and have everything published, but I also journal all the time. And I have created journals for people to start to explore their own story within themselves. And I think journaling and, you know, listening and seeing your own words on paper and being able to express them is so healing. And it's not just healing, it actually allows you to understand. I feel like when you write and connect all the different pieces of the puzzle that is who we are, you really start to understand yourself. You start to understand why you feel the way you feel or why things happen the way that they happen. So for me, writing The Secret Language of Your Body, which I have over here, um,
Yeah.
which is actually an
For those on
Australian
YouTube,
edition.
for those on YouTube, you can see the copy of the book. For those that are listening, we'll make sure there's information about it in the show notes.
So when I was writing this particular book, it was probably the easiest book that I have written out of all the books that I've done. And I've also done a lot of card decks to give people those prompts and insights. But it was really interesting because when I was writing this, I actually had two really young children, and I had a practice where I was seeing clients all the time, and I was also starting to teach more and travel. So it was a crazy time, and I don't know how I wrote it. And I wrote it within a year, partly because I already had a lot of information. And it was there were very, very difficult parts around writing this book. And I'm going to say the reason was because there is a whole section. So there's different sections in the book. And one of the sections is on body parts and understanding all the parts of your body. Because I kind of figured if we have illness or challenges, they'll be somewhere in the body. And if we can start to connect to those parts, we can befriend them. And so I wrote about the thoughts, the feelings, the experiences, the behaviors that can cause those challenges for the body to start to degenerate. But I also gave very layered but simple processes that people could do to heal themselves. So I really, really enjoyed that part of it. I loved and loved writing the processes. But then I got to the section on diseases. And to write about all the diseases, I actually had to literally tune into the disease, to tune into. So I had many, many clients by that stage around the world. And we didn't have, at the time that I wrote it, there was no Zoom, there was nothing like, there's no video. So I had clients in America, in Europe, in Asia, and all of it was over the phone without me actually even seeing them, but just through tuning in. And I started seeing all this connected, experiences, and I'm very good at keeping notes. And so I would write all these down and go, "Ooh, this is very connected." And at that stage when I was doing this, there was only two other books like this. So there was Louise Hay's book, which was beautiful and kind of opened the doors for everyone. But for me, I'm a very deep, detailed person. And I just felt like there was not enough information. I needed to discover more. And there was another book, I can't actually remember its name, and it was very similar. Like it just had one line about each part of the body or, what was going on and an affirmation to heal. And I really, really needed more. And so I when I got to that part of like, going from one disease to another, I remember going, oh my God, this is so heavy. It is so hard because it's almost like connecting to another being and really trying to understand why do we have this disease? Like, what causes it? What kind of thought patterns, feelings, what do we do? And so I literally had to enter into it to be accurate, right? And people have said to me that over the years that this has been the most accurate book out of books in that genre that they've ever connected with. And it's because I literally tuned into each problem, each issue. And then I write about emotions and understanding them. That was much easier. And there's also a section on color. That was the most fun, the easiest part to write about how color affects our emotions and our emotional state. And the last section is on the systems of the body, and that was pretty easy, and interesting to kind of get a sense of what are the lessons that they're actually trying to teach us. And so overall, it was a very interesting experience of connecting so many pieces. And I probably loved writing the processes the most because I wanted to write them in a way that people could really embrace, right? So I kind of went, so some people are visual, so I'm going to have a visual aspect. Some people are more auditory. I'm going to try to bring auditory. Some people are kinesthetic. I'm going to bring kinesthetic aspect and touch and pressure points to it. Some people, express through communication, so I'm going to have that part. Some people like to move. I'm going to bring movement to it. So I kind of went, how do we use all of ourselves, but it's still really safe to do? And we can explore and ask, again, really powerful questions based on each part of the body. And so that part was really creative and fun. And I got to talk to Chinese medicine practitioners and read, and study like different books on acupressure and acupuncture, but also systems. So I went to different courses, well, a lot of them prior to writing the book, but I would learn about. I was invited to like reflexology colleges, or I had a lot of nurses, and so I would speak, but I would also try and spend some time learning about different aspects that they were talking about. So I had all these like hundreds of books, around where I would refer back in terms of, oh, this is the point, or, this is the point we need to hold in terms of a pressure point, or this is a mudra we need to use. So I wanted to combine things that were so easy for people to do, or we need to, kind of touch a point, or we need to massage it, or we need whatever it is. So I learned a lot, even as I was researching. And also, what I did after I read the book, I was like, okay, I need to make sure it's accurate. I sent it to every practitioner of every modality that I actually knew. And I said to them, please read it for accuracy, and tell me, is there anything like any pressure point, anything that that I've said that you're going, oh my God, this is so wrong, and come back to me, and I'm happy to have a conversation and understand. And so it was this amazing process of people coming back to me. And I remember I was very young also at the time when I read it. I was only 26. And I was literally sitting there in fear, going, oh my God, what are they going to say? And then people started, and I had psychiatrists. I mean, I sent it to a lot of doctors as well that were quite well known. So when you actually open the book, there's so many testimonials from doctors, like, you know, a lot of them, um, and different health professionals. And I remember thinking, oh my God, they're going to say this and that. And all of them came back. It was pretty much everyone came back with the most positive shares that I just sat there crying, going, oh, I can't believe that they're saying all these positive things because I was young, and I kind of went, can I do this? And so it was inspiring. And there was so many kind of synchronicities that happened and divine occurrences as well around this book. So it felt very, kind of divinely guided.
That's fantastic. I know writing a book, it can be it's very profound. It's personal. You doing what you did, going out and sending it off to, all the people in different modalities is pretty unique. I never thought of sending my book off to people, but yours is more specific to one specific area of our lives, which is our whole life, our health, right? From mental
Yeah.
to physical to emotional. So that's great. You got all those insights to writing the book. You can, those watching on YouTube, you obviously could see how you were so excited. You can see the body language, you can see your energy coming out talking about what the book did for you, and that's exactly what I wanted to hear. Was it a transformational process? Did you learn from it? Is it still helping you move your life forward today? Of course, right? Of course it is. Even though you wrote it, I think it was 2010 you wrote it. What year did you write it?
Well, no, I actually originally, because it takes time for it to get published and also to publish in different countries, and now it's in 27 languages. So I originally actually wrote it, when I wrote it was 2006. When it got published in Australia, it was 2007 the first
Oh,
time.
okay.
And then in the US, it got published in 2010.
Wow. So it's been quite the journey, and I like the fact that the book would have to be, because I did research it, it's still in the top sellers, at least in North America for Amazon. Um, it has to be pretty much evergreen, meaning those that don't understand the terminology, it'll be good forever. It'll be good for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. It'll still be a language you need to learn to understand your body, to understand your mind, your soul, right? To continually help people. So that's fantastic to hear. Anything else you want to share about that book before we move on?
I just like to share the experiences that were so like divinely kind of guided. So, speaking of doctors as well, so I actually have a forward from Dr. Bernie Siegel, and who's not related, yeah, but and his name is spelled in a different way. But it was so funny because I knew that I needed a forward from a doctor, and he's written countless books that were, bestsellers. And so as I was trying to figure it out, and this is what happens often, you're kind of figuring out and figuring out and figuring out, and it just wasn't getting like I was getting a lot of doctors that I wanted kind of testimonials from, but not the forward. And so I kept asking kind of for the high beings to give me an insight. And then I remember it was getting to maybe 2 months before the book was published. And I was thinking, come on, like time's running out. I know time is different in the spiritual, but in the physical, give me an insight. And I remember I was doing a healing session with somebody, and it was like this bubble that came into my head and burst. And I got Dr. Bernie Siegel, and I remember thinking, that is so obvious because I had read his books about miracles and in healing, and he was one of the first, I think, earliest people talking about, how you can start to use your own mind and emotions to work with. I think it was in particular cancer and stuff like that. And so I had read several of his books. And I remember saying to my partner at the time, oh my God, I've got it. It's Dr. Bernie Siegel. Let's contact him. So we contacted him, and amazingly, he actually answered within 24 hours. And he said, send me the book. If I like it and I think it's good, I'll give you the forward. And if not, then I won't. And I was like, okay. And so a week later, my partner and I, we were walking around this street, and he turned to me and he said, what do you think? Do you think you're going to get the forward? And I said to him, and just before I said anything, there was this truck that went by and it said Bernie. And then I turned around to face my partner, and there was a shop and it said Seagull. And I said to him, if this is not a sign, I seriously, I don't know what is. I think I will. And the next day we got the forward. So it was just one of the stories that were amazing around this book.
That's amazing. Yeah, there's the biggest thing is there's signs all around us, right? We
Yeah.
can think they're coming from a higher power or like, Jesus Christ, God's intervention in our lives, but many times people get brought to us, ideas get brought to us, we'll turn our head and see something and that's a higher power telling us, "Hey, there's your idea. Hey, there's your person." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Here's some more answers for you. So I like how you shared that, and how you got that forward. It's interesting though, right? What we give, we get back. Whether you're giving to the universe or you're giving it up to God, whatever it is, at the end of the day, we got to be willing to, have faith that things will happen the way that we need them to happen. But it's nice when you have those little signs like you experienced with your significant other. That's interesting to hear.
And
So,
if I can just add
yeah, go
one other
ahead.
thing, so often people don't do something that they feel because they're just scared. And I know I definitely had moments where I was like, should I put this book out? How am I going to be treated? What are people going to say? Are they going to criticize? And and there's definitely people who have and will. But what was amazing for me, and, that you don't know and you don't expect, is how many people how many people I've met over the years since the book's been out that have literally come to me in tears and have gone, I wouldn't be alive if you didn't write this book, or I wouldn't be here, I wouldn't be healthy, I wouldn't have changed my life, I can't, I know we're not meant to say this, but I can't tell you how many people have come to me and have said, um, you know, I was at the end of kind of my tether. I was diagnosed with cancer, tumors, or an autoimmune disease, or whatever it was, countless diseases. And I was told that nothing can help me. And I've used your book, and it has. And I wanted to tell you, that the incurable is curable, so to speak. And so that was so inspiring, especially at times where it's actually come from medical professionals themselves, nurses or doctors. I was speaking to somebody literally a couple of weeks ago, and she said, "Oh, I'm creating this wellness center, but we have a doctor." And she said, the first thing he said is that we must get your book in. He loves your book. And she was like, he recommends it to everyone. And I've heard this from quite a few doctors where they're like, I have that, who are obviously more open-minded. I have it on my desk. Everyone who comes gets to look at it. And so that is so inspiring when something like that happens. And when you're writing or when you're sharing, you don't know who you're going to influence and how you're going to impact them. And so we often don't do it because we're scared, as opposed to going, what if I can go beyond myself and just put it out there? And okay, people might criticize it, but how many people can benefit from it?
Exactly. I appreciate that. So, one of the things I want to start going into a little bit more stuff before we run out of time, illness beyond the physical. Obviously, what you're talking about is all about that, right? Beyond the physical, what causes that illness? Is it something that was, genetic? Did it come through your DNA? Did you get it environmentally? Did you get it from whatever circumstance? But really, why is illness rarely just physical? That it's a manifestation.
Well, because essentially we actually have this internal wisdom and this, and we have to grow, like we talked about in this way. And a body is actually a way of giving us those insights, because how else would we get those insights? How else would we know? So there's that part that when we embrace, it just changes everything. One, but if we start to look at the body and we start to break it down into what is this wisdom? What is it actually trying to tell us? And so if we look at the area around the head and we start asking questions, what does it do? Right? What's this area about? And so we know it's all about thinking. It's all about, how do I think about life? How do I perceive experiences? You know, how do I kind of co-create my life based on experiences that I've had? And some of them might be very difficult, like I talked about, very traumatic experiences. And if we start playing these traumas over and over and over again and playing the perspective of fear or victimhood or limitation, then this area is going to start degenerating, right? We're going to start being affected, and we'll start being negative, we'll start judging, we'll start constantly having this really negative self-talk, and that has a huge impact on your thinking and on your hormones, on your glandular system, on everything. So we have the pineal pituitary glands, all of these parts of your body, they're going to be affected, which then affects the rest of the body. But then if we just very briefly look at the throat area, for instance, it's all about communication. So when the throat or thyroid, which I see a lot of as people, get a little bit older and start to get into their 40s, 50s, and so on, the thyroid starts to degenerate for a lot of people, because this is all about, who am I? Using my voice, expressing myself, sharing with the world, I guess, sharing my truth. But people get really confused with that one, because it's not just sharing whatever you want to share. It's learning how to communicate with different people based on what they can hear, and still sharing your truth, but in a way that is received. When people don't do that, they actually shut down, and then they push all of this back and they push it into their neck. And so a huge amount of people have neck issues and shoulder issues. And we have that saying, pain in the neck. And this is all about relationships and communication that has not been healthy. And so unhealthy communication actually leads a lot of parts of the body to break down, but in particular the throat, the thyroid, the neck, the shoulders, because we also start to carry people's stresses and responsibilities on our shoulders. And then we start to move to the chest area and the heart, for instance, and we have so many people with heart issues. And that's a really good question to ask. Why? Why do we have that? And part of it is that the heart is the area of our greatest sensitivity and vulnerability. And so this is when it starts to connect to, well, how was I brought up? Was I brought up to express my heart and to trust, you know, the feelings, because this is also a feeling area, or to push away my feelings, to not trust my heart, to be afraid of people, to, was I rejected? How was I treated? Right? Because this is like when we're hurt by the people we love the most, our heart starts to, well, we start to experience pain and we shut down and we numb and we have depression and we have anxiety. And so when we have that shutdown, it's like, eventually it causes heart issues, it causes blood issues, it causes blood pressure. So what's difficult about the heart area and why we have so many challenges, even though they always talk about it being a food issue. And I'm like, you know what? There's been so many experiments that have been done where people had a carb, a diet full of, carbs, let's just say. Um, in Italy, they have that in all sorts of different villages. And people were really connected to each other and they were supportive and they weren't lonely and they weren't isolated. And it didn't matter what they ate. They had really healthy hearts, like in these communities, in these villages. So this is so much about the lack of community that we have, the phones, that we don't know how to communicate with people, or we're just so hurt. We don't know how to process our trauma and our hurt in terms of intimacy. And so that ends up with, really bad physical conditions and heart attacks and all sorts of heart issues. And then we have the chest and the lungs, and this is very connected to, again, that sensitivity and emotions and expression. And when we have sadness, when we have conflict, when we have loss, and we don't process it and we just freeze it because it's hard. I know with my partner now, we have these jokes where he's like, don't say the V word, and, the V word is vulnerability. And he's like, as a joke, she's like, for men, that's really difficult word. We've been taught not to be vulnerable, and you're trying to say that that's all wrong. And so, all of this, the more we hold the heart, we have the hardening of arteries, not just from food, and actually less from food than from the fact that we harden ourselves and hold back. And then we have, and again, I'm trying to jump a little bit because there's so much, to say, but the digestive system is all about digesting experiences and assimilating. So now we have the thinking here, so in our heads, the thinking, in our chest up to the stomach, there's a lot of feeling, but it's also, as we get into the intestinal system, it's all about experiences. It's the will, like, how do we experience life? Are we assimilating the experiences? And then we start to, I mean, if we had more time, we'd go into the feminine and the masculine, because we have the left and the right sides of the body that tell us the story about what our relationship has been with a mother figure, what our relationship has been with a father figure. The whole foundation for our reproductive system and our reproductive health is connected to what we saw in the first 7 years of life. And actually, as we connect to the body and we get to know it both from the physical perspective, but also the energetic, which is the chakra perspective, we start to see timelines and the development of the organs and the chakras based on different timelines, in particular 7-year periods. So it becomes so, so fascinating. And then I'm just going to say, when it comes to your legs and knees, again, so many people have issues as they get older with that area or the hip area, and it's all about moving forward. So when in our inner self we go, okay, I don't know how to move forward. I'm getting older. My body's not as healthy. Um, this is when, these issues show up, or when the hip is always connected to your family, always. So whatever, if there's a lot of conflict going on with the family, then the hip area shows up. I was talking to somebody yesterday and she said, oh, my client has a hip issue. And I said, because I was like, connected to her partner, must be the right hip. And she's like, yep. So so each part of the body is there to inspire us to understand our life. And that's why it's never just, or I should not say never, but it's very, very, very rarely just physical.
I love how you broke that down. Actually, I had some of those questions, but you're right. We don't have time to dive into feminine and masculine dynamics. But the best thing for people to do, we're going to have a couple more questions, is to ensure that they go check your website out, go check out your book. Do some research, find out how it can make a difference in your life. But again, yeah, we could spend hours breaking this down and taking it,
Yep.
create a series on it. But we're going to go on to emotional healing and safety. You talked about some of that. And one of the things that you mentioned, or that I read about, is, most emotional healing approaches the fact of being, quick. This is going to happen in 30, 60, 90 days, or, we're going to give you fast results, all the marketing that comes out in regards to healing even not just our emotional, but even just our physical health. But you've said that this can be unsafe, right? To do this in a fast way. What makes this harmful? And what would you do differently in regards to telling people, don't be so rushed to fix your challenges?
Wow. Again, how many hours do we have? Um, this is actually the new book I'm writing. This is about the different stages of healing versus um, the fact that when we rush, we always skip steps, which means we we have to go back. And so we kind of put a band-aid on as opposed to actually going through the layers of healing. But more than that, when we get to the stage of healing, which in my view is actually stage 7, which is a stage of release, and we've jumped and skipped all these steps because it took years often to get to the condition you're in, right? Um, so we've skipped all these steps. What actually often happens in the release stage is that we have a really painful release, and it could be, quite shocking and traumatic, because a nervous system actually has to become much more flexible to release what has been pushed away and stored and stuck in the body for God knows how long, for many, many years. And then, so if you want to have what people call a real crisis, and I'm not for that, because the more harsh something is, the less likely people are to do it again, and the more they're likely to run away from it. Whereas I believe in gentle healing that allows you to take whatever time you need to take without forcing or rushing, but actually through a process of self-discovery. And if I can just take a few moments to share
Sure.
about my discovery around emotions. So I've been teaching about emotions for 25 years now. And when I first started, and I think it's okay maybe to look at that at the beginning, I saw emotions in a very general way, right? So anger was, just general anger, and sadness, general sadness. And then over time, I started breaking this down and started going, well, actually, the sadness that I feel in my heart is not the same sadness that I have in my kidneys when I connect with it, and not the same sadness that I feel in my knees if I connect with my knees. And so the heart sadness was connected to my deep intertwined relationships with people, that were like my main relationships, my children, my partner, or whoever, I was very, very close with, my, closest friends. But when I connected to the kidneys, the relationships here were actually more to do with the sadness around loss, sadness around loss of family, as opposed to, how somebody said something to me or how they affected me, which was in my heart. So the kidneys were about fear meets loss and my fear of losing people in my family or them dying or them being sick. So it was a very, very different fear meets sadness. And then with the knees, it's like, will I be able to move forward and achieve what I want to achieve? So they're not the same. And this is where people, and I even at the beginning, got confused, because the more you generalize, the harder it is actually to work with something, right? Because you actually, and the longer it takes and the more likely you're going to have to go back to it. So I realized that we might say the same words in different parts of the body, but they're actually not the same experience. So that was a huge thing. And then over the years, what I realized is that I was very, very good at getting people to feel their emotions, whatever the emotion was. I remember one of my close friends, he said, it's like you can make a rock cry if you wanted to. And he was right. But I also went through a process because I've been teaching all over the world for years and years and years. And I saw in my workshops, people might scream and shout and cry and all of that. But a week later, they would still have those feelings and they would go, okay, I feel like I've released them, but why are they still here? And so I started feeling like we need a structured approach to really understand how to work with feelings, because I do like structure. I'm very logical as well as spiritual and intuitive. And so I was like, we need a system. And I started looking, at, well, what's already there? What has been brought to us? And I actually connected to Jung's work, because obviously I've looked at psychology, I've looked at everything that I can, find over the many years. And I went, well, this was the foundation. Why did he believe that? And how do these, archetypes, which is what he became aware of, how do we work with them in terms of our thoughts, emotions, and experiences, as well as memory? Because people would say, well, I don't remember what happened to me when I was 5. And I was like, well, that's true. But how do I help them connect to that memory? And so I started really deeply exploring archetypes in terms of emotional healing and the safety and how safe it was, because as the archetype would appear, you would see the age or sense this time of development. You would connect to the thought, you would connect to not just one feeling but several. You would connect to the body part, you would connect to the experience of it, and it would tell you the story. But you could also be aware of, is this part really traumatized and stuck? Like, I was speaking to one of my students yesterday, and he said, he was having some pretty big issues with his bladder. And, so I said to him, how are you going? And he said, well, actually, I connected to my inner child archetype, and this part of me was really sad and was, stuck. And I worked on him, and the problem has become a lot better in the last 2 days. And this was physically, because he said, I had awareness and I was able to understand where it was coming from and work with it. And I mean, it was serious. It was like there was blood involved. And he said, like, it just stopped, it disappeared. So when we're talking about things, and again, this man has been working for a while with this work, so it's not, instant in that sense. But as you connect the pieces and you connect them in this safer, more structured way in understanding yourself. So often people say, I'm anxious or I'm afraid. And I say, well, hold on a sec. What if it wasn't all of you? What if there was a part of you that was afraid or anxious, and there was a part of you that actually had wisdom and strength and wasn't afraid? And we can use that wise part, we can work with this wise part to work, to help the part that is anxious by understanding it and understanding, how did it get stuck or stunted, and how do we work with it to bring it back into healing and alignment, and so that it can become a part of you instead of pushed out of your inner self. And that is a huge, huge part of healing that many people skip because they don't understand it, that there's parts of us that have been pushed away, rejected because we were told, don't cry, don't do this, don't be like that as children. And then we believe that, and we've done it most of our lives. And so by bringing these parts back, we start to have a really amazing healing experience. And if I can just share a very quick story about this, I had a friend who I actually met, I think it was in the US. And I was really manifesting at the time when I had the book out and I was going on tour. And I was really manifesting to connect with somebody who was a producer and who could kind of give me insights and help me to understand more about, filming and so on, and being on different TV shows. Anyway, so I met this man, and his name was Lee Grant. And Lee Grant had actually, at that time, he had been a producer for the Oprah show for 11 years, and he had worked with Sarah Jessica Raphael and so on. But there was quite a period of time where he stopped because he had a conflict with Oprah, and it ended up being, in the news media, all over the news, quite a few years before that. And so he ended up having a breakdown, essentially, and working in a job in Walmart. And so, and he said, I discovered God in Walmart. But when we met, we started talking about this shadow and these archetypes and all of this stuff. And and I kept saying to him, so what's Oprah like? Tell me about Oprah. And he was like, what do you like? And, Oprah has shadow and light and so on, but he wouldn't talk about her. And then we became really close friends. And a few years later, I was doing a workshop in New York, and I said to him, okay, I need help. Can you come and be my helper? And he was like, yeah, okay, cool. So we had this bus ride that was 3 hours long. And I said to him, all right, we're going to talk about Oprah. And he was like, no, we're not. And I said to him, well, we are actually, because I'm very good at convincing. And I am very convincing because I said to him, look, I've known you for several years now and I love you, but I feel like you're not connecting to your name. Like Grant is like big and expressive, and I feel like you're acting like le petit, like you're being small, and you're actually holding on to this experience and this trauma you had, and you're not moving forward in your life. And he had a lot of health conditions at that time. And so we went to this course, and I said, you've got to. So he talked to me about Oprah, and we went to the course, and I was like, you have to participate, and there could be a release that happens. And so he did. And then the next day, I'm trying to call him. He's not picking up after the course had finished. It was 3 days long at the time. And then he calls me, and he's like, I haven't been feeling the best. So he had been suppressing this for years and years and years, came to the course, had not really done anything before for his own healing. And he said, oh, I haven't been feeling well. I've been throwing up, which is what I mean by this big release if you haven't done it slowly. And I said to him, oh, hey, that's really good. You're gonna, your health is gonna improve dramatically after this. Because he was having difficulty seeing, having difficulty just being, he had a blood issue and so on. So afterwards, within weeks, he was calling me and he was like, I have never felt better in my life. Because he originally he said I wasn't signing up for throwing up, and I was like, I know, but you had not done all the bits and pieces to create this softening in the nervous system, and so your release is harsh, but it's still manageable, right? Sometimes it gets a lot if you just kind of jump into things. So it was still manageable, and it was incredible how much his health improved just from starting to connect to his body and his mind and everything he was doing. So and he actually, the most beautiful thing was not only that, he started producing amazing content again and working with amazing people after that, because up till that he was suppressing it so much that he was making himself ill. And that's what we do. We have a trauma, we have a high, maybe a beautiful experience, and then something happened. And then we end up suppressing our talents as well and our abilities and doing what we don't want to do and wondering why our health is so bad and why it's deteriorating. And then by connecting to the body, we might have a release and then we might go, I might want to slow this down and start to have a healing practice. And this is where I kind of went, we need structure, we need foundation, and I can really help people to transform by understanding the whole story as opposed to just emotions.
That's awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. We're going to wrap up the show. There's so much else I wanted to discuss. We're going to have to get you to reach out and we'll get you on the show again because I'd really like to discuss your understanding modern spirituality, right? Because I think there's a lot of people out in this planet that need to understand and have more awareness on so many different topics. So I appreciate you.
Love to do that.
I appreciate you sharing everything that you have shared thus far. Inna, if you could give our listeners one last piece of encouragement, something from your own life proving it's always worth giving a heck and never giving up, what would that advice be?
So much, but start to connect to your own self, to your own body. Start to ask questions, start to explore, start to discover more and more and more about who you are, about, right. Allow yourself to breathe into your body, to feel more. If you have intuitive insights, don't just push them away because your inner self is trying to guide you into a beautiful direction. So trust yourself. And the biggest thing out of all of this is that if somebody tells you you're too old, too young, to this, to that, to heal and transform, then don't listen to them and find the people who say something that is inspiring, that open doors to you towards self-discovery in a completely different way.
Oh,
So, yeah.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. What's the best way that people can contact you? And yeah,
So the best way is to go to innasegal.com, so INNASEGAL.com. But if they want to learn more, I really encourage people to jump onto my master classes. In particular, the easiest way to find it is innasegal.com/masterclass. So as long as you just put /masterclass, um, and you'll see how I'm putting all the pieces together, and there's several processes in every masterclass, but that particular one kind of connects all the pieces that I've been talking about here together as well.
I appreciate that. Those new to the Give a Heck podcast, whether you watch on YouTube or listen, you can go to giveaheck.com, go to the podcast tab, go in, you'll see a picture of Inna, and she will literally be all her social media, all her website, what she talked about in regards to her mastermind. I'll make sure that's all in there so that you'll have a one-stop shop and not have to pull over to the side of the road if you're listening to this in your vehicle and write things down. So you check giveaheck.com for the website and all pertinent information in regards to our conversation. Like you'll have full edited transcript as well as chapter summaries in regards to the show. I look forward to having you back on. Any last final comments before we wrap up the show?
I just think that when people open their minds to new possibilities, the world changes. It's not just on the physical level, it's spiritual, it's relationships, it's intuition, it is your work, it's finances, it's literally on every level. And I thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to share in this way.
You're welcome, Inna. Thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time and sharing your knowledge and talent that you've grown over a lifetime to help other people out. So my final message would be your body is speaking, your soul is listening, and your healing is waiting for you to show up. Give a heck, give it fully, because your story is sacred and your transformation is possible. I'd like you to understand that our today's guest, Inna, reminding us that healing is not just fixing symptoms, it's about reclaiming our truth. If this episode moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that healing is possible, even when hope feels distant. Please subscribe to the show on YouTube or your favorite listening platform that you listen to podcasts on. Leave a review. I'd appreciate that. Share it with your friends and family and those you feel need help, right? That are on the cusp of the abyss of falling off and not being present in society any longer. You can help them. You can direct them to this episode or any episode that is alive to help people give a heck about their life and know that it's never too late to give a heck. Thank you for taking time out of your day and listening to Give a Heck. If you find value, I'd appreciate you sharing with your friends and family so they too can learn how to live life on purpose, not by accident. So you do not miss the next episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and please also post a review. I look forward to reading your comments. This has been Dwight Heck. If you want to check out other podcast episodes or today's show notes, please check out my website, giveaheck.com. And until next time, together let us all strive to give a heck.